everybody, another affordable fun car review today, and this is one I've been trying to hunt down for quite some time. Today I am driving a Renault Sport Megane 275 Cup S. Now those of you who've watched the channel for a while might remember the fact that I briefly owned a third generation Renault Sport Megane based on the 250, and it was extensively modified, and unfortunately that was, until now, the only example of a third generation Megane that I'd ever driven. I put a call out asking if anybody had a relatively standard car for me to drive, and lo and behold, this car's lovely owner got in touch, and here we are. So what's really significant about the 275 Cup S?
The Cup S was a run-out model designed to help shift units of the then aging Megane. It was aimed at the track enthusiast and gave them everything they wanted as standard and nothing more. In other words, you got the Cup chassis, Cup suspension, and that was about it.
Everything else that you might have wanted on this car was an optional extra. You could have things like an Akrapovic exhaust, you could have Öhlins suspension, you could have racier seats, you could have fancier climate control, all this stuff. This car has none of that. This is the bare bones, no frills, no options version. It's as pure as you can possibly get, and I think therefore a very good way to experience what this model is all about. The sole modification to this vehicle is a PowerFlex engine mount. That's it. Now this car does get enjoyed and used on track on occasion, but its owner hasn't yet felt the desperate need to upgrade any of the parts, and I think that really speaks volumes for what Renault Sport did with this car. It's really not a car that you'd buy for the fit, the finish, or the luxury of it. I mean, stuff like the petrol cap at the back, that just doesn't fit at all, and this interior is fairly low rent for a 4-year-old hatchback. These seats are not as bad as they look. They look tragic, but they're actually half decent. I would have much preferred something like the Recaros, which I've seen in many other Renault Sport Meganes, but of course the thing about seats is that you can change them. And if you're a real track day fiend, you don't want to be spending extra money on seats in a car that you're going to rip out anyway, and I think that's what Renault decided to do with this car. Take the almost Japanese route and give you just the bare basics. This car is running the bog standard 275 horsepower. That's if you've pressed the sport button. If you haven't, you've only got 250. Why Renault chose to do that, I have absolutely no idea, but that's French logic for you. I have to say that I think the engine actually is much better for being unmodified. The problem with my car is that it gave you this huge, great big wad of torque at about 2 and a bit thousand RPM and then tailed off almost instantly. It really was just a sort of one-punch engine. This car has a much flatter torque curve. You can really feel it, and it's of great benefit, particularly in tricky conditions like the ones we're facing today. The car does have, as you might hope, a limited slip differential, and when you're in sport mode it also engages the sporty settings for the traction control, which allow the slip differential to do its thing. It spins around, moves, weaves a little bit, but it's never worrying or disconcerting. You've just got to keep an eye on it when you're in tricky conditions. The seating position in this car is also far better than my last one, because in that you were sat so unbelievably low you could barely see over the front. Now, I still can't see that much bonnet. I can see just a little bit if I do that, but you at least feel like you're sat in the right place in the car. Before, I felt like I was a sort of, 5-year-old sat in daddy's car looking up at the steering wheel. All very odd. And the dials nearly make sense being angled back. They do look like they're roughly pointed towards you from this angle. Having a standard exhaust, this car also sounds as good as a Renault Sport Megane is ever going to. Simply put, if you put an exhaust on these, they just sound nasty. There's no nice noises to be had from these things at all. Just don't waste your time or money trying to achieve it. They're just not a great sounding engine. They don't rev particularly high. I mean, by the time this engine is completely done and hitting its red line, my S2000 would be engaging VTEC. It's not the sort of car to buy if you're a rev-hungry madman. However, for general daily driving duties, the car doesn't feel anywhere near as compromised as you might expect it to. The suspension's actually surprisingly compliant. The car is reasonably comfortable. Yes, it fidgets around quite a bit at low speed, but it's actually pretty good. The gearbox too is way nicer than in my Megane. That had the big old CAE shifter in it, which I was not a fan of. Now, it's possible that Renault made some upgrades to the gear shift between the 250 and 275, so if there's any Renault experts out there who can tell me if they did, I would love to know, because this gearbox actually is fine. The throw is a little long and the box is a tiny bit imprecise, but you're in no doubt as to whether you've found a gear or not, and in comparison to many other French boxes that I've driven, it's actually pretty damn good. One piece of spec which is omitted from the Cup S as standard that I find a little bit odd is the Renault Sport monitor. It's the little digital display that comes up here and gives you all sorts of interesting information, a G meter, all that kind of stuff. And you would have thought in a car that Renault was selling to a sporty crowd, they'd have chucked that in, but no, it was still an option. It's also strange that in a bright yellow car they chose to fit red seat belts. My preferred spec of Renault Sport Megane would be this gorgeous liquid yellow, which is one of my favourite car colours, full stop, with the Recaro seats with a little bit of yellow on them and yellow seat belts. And I think you can also get a yellow rev counter. I think my RS250 had the yellow rev counter, so that would be pretty spot on. And I would go for the Cup chassis, I think, because it just suits this kind of car. If you're thinking of one of these as your one and only car, and I think a lot of people would, there are a few things to keep in mind. Rear seating space is actually pretty decent, and rear boot space is not hideous, but it's the load hatch which is the issue. It's very high and very narrow, so if you want to get in large and bulky items, like for example a pushchair, you might find that a little bit of a struggle. Similarly to my own car, the steering in this isn't the most communicative in the world, and it's direct enough. The most recent 1.8 litre Megane is still the king in terms of driving feel, but I do prefer the engine in this. And in fact, I actually think I prefer the engine in this to the one in my own Megane. By keeping that torque low, you feel like there's actually some benefit to revving the thing out. And as you would hope from any hot hatch, this is an excellent tool for covering ground on your classic British B-road. In short, the Renault Sport Megane 275 Cup S is kind of everything I'd hope from a hot Megane. It is missing a couple of items that I'd really like, the sexier seats, but they're easily fixed, and the steering feel just isn't quite as good as some of the hot hatch greats, like for example the Honda Civic Type R or the Hyundai i30N. But that is really a small chink in the armour of a car, which is a pretty complete package. And I have to say, it's one of those cars where, having now owned an extremely modified example, granted that was very extreme, and now driven this standard version, I really would leave the car fairly standard, because if you want to use it on the road, it's pretty damn good out of the box. This hasn't got the Trick Öhlins dampers, which again probably make it a bit better on track, but maybe compromise it on the road. The Akrapovic exhaust is simply unnecessary, and everything else really is just frilly bits. The lovely thing, of course, is that if you do want to go down the mod route with this car, there is a pretty decent market of bits for them, and you can turn it into basically anything you want to. But honestly, I'd really try and resist that temptation. Leave it as standard as you can possibly bear. You can pick one of these up now for around about £15,000. Prices do vary depending on the spec, the age, and of course which version of the Megane it is. You can get an earlier RS250 from about 7,000 quid, and in many ways it is most of the car, but obviously not quite as new, and will be missing a few little bits of spec too. But generally there's probably more similar than different between them. I personally prefer the looks of these later cars. The front end is just a little bit tidier, but on the whole, I really can't fault the Megane all that much. The only areas it really fails are the areas where you'd expect any French car to fail. They just didn't really give two shits when they were screwing it together, but hey ho, if you're going to track it, who cares? Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. See you for the next one. Bye bye.